Hey folks, so it's been a long time since I've actually uploaded a video. Um, I've been just very busy with, just non-YouTube things. I've been on Facebook, I've been on Twitter, so if you've been following me, I've been writing a lot of stuff there and getting involved with the communities over there, but, I just thought, it'd be nice to catch up a little bit with the YouTube community, and occasionally I still get subscribers and comments on old videos, and it's kind of surreal looking at my old videos and sort of looking at the content that I was presenting and not agreeing with it, or thinking or feeling that I would present it differently now that I'm older, now that it's just later. And, it's just how it works, though, with YouTube. You just get a different perspective on the past because your past is another person's present, because they're seeing the video for the first time, 5 years later, 6 years later, and it's just kind of interesting. I still have videos up here from, like, undergrad and college and in the dorm rooms and things like that, so I think it's a kind of interesting flash from the past. So in the interim, I have been just very busy trying to get my life in order, trying to get my career going. I graduated from Goddard College. I'm now in Florida, on the Space Coast, near Central Florida, about 40 minutes out of Orlando, looking for work. I'm currently working with EFSC, the Eastern State Florida College, and I'm just doing test proctoring right now, hoping to become an adjunct professor. And I'm also looking at adjuncting positions on the West Coast, as well as just the interesting things and goings-on in California, especially in San Francisco. So the biggest event, I guess, that happened over the past couple of months was actually 2 weeks ago. I got to go to San Francisco Bay and stay at a nice hotel and live blog the Integral Theory Conference. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Integral Theory was developed by a philosopher, American philosopher by the name of Ken Wilber, and many years ago, during my earlier videos, I was very interested in this individual's body of writings, and he's still alive. He's still living in, I think, Denver, Colorado now. And allegedly, arguably, he started a kind of integral movement, or a movement of thought where basically his theory is sort of a theory of everything, and it's a developmental theory that tries to integrate all of these different disciplines, from sociology to psychology to ecology and all sorts of other things. And I don't particularly care for theories of everything, but I do tend to think in ways that are very interrelated, transdisciplinary. I like to dabble in spiritual writings and spiritual counterculture and consciousness studies, but then I also like to read media studies about technology and the internet and communication and humanities and education. So I'm all over the place. So a theory like that, I think, is why I initially was so drawn to that style of thinking. Although my style is a little bit more eclectic, so I tend to not like the systemization. So over the past couple of years, although I've been very interested in Wilber's ideas, I've sort of diverged from the path. I've been sort of a critic, a conscientious critic, in the sense that I'm enjoying the theory, I am appreciating it, but I'm also looking at other writers. I'm also looking at other so-called integral thinkers, transdisciplinary thinkers, or big picture scholars. For instance, William Irwin Thompson, who I've also posted a lot about, and I actually have an interview up on here. And he was kind enough to be present for my graduating master's presentation, digitally at least. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. So I went to this theory conference, and I do have to say that so much has changed in integral thinking over the past 3 or 4 years. The leadership, as far as the Sean Hargan-Jurgens and Mark Foreman and Jordan Luftig, and a number of other individuals who are part of the conference organization, they're really trying to push off Ken Wilber's work and move into what they call Wilber-based theory. So from Wilber-centric to Wilber-based, meaning they want to take integral theory and do new things with it, and collaborate with other scholars, and collaborate with other meta-theories. So that was the big emphasis of this conference. So we had this British scholar by the name of Roy Bhaskar, who was present at the conference. He was one of the keynote speakers. And then we also had Edgar Morin, and Edgar Morin is a very famous French sociologist who coined the term the complexity thought, or complexity thinking. And I'm sure more of you are probably aware of complexity thought or complexity thinking because he's been writing about this since, say, like the 60s or the 70s, and he's been writing since the 50s. This guy fought against the Nazis and the resistance. He was a Marxist. He has an ear to the heads of state, so people listen to him. People want his consultation. So he's a very, very involved individual. He's a really awesome guy. He's 92 years old, and it was just so cool seeing him walking around the hotel and in the elevator. And then when he got on the stage, he went from a 92-year-old dude to this extremely vibrant, passionate speaker, and he was using his hands and with a heavy, heavy French accent. You could barely understand a word he was saying, actually, in English, and just articulating and passionately explaining what complexity is and the need for kind of global style of thinking, and it was really inspiring. In Bhaskar's work, Bhaskar developed the theory of critical realism, which was a kind of response to postmodern thinking, modernist and postmodernist thought, the schools of thought in academia, kind of way forward, or an attempt to push things forward into a new direction. So whether or not you agree that he was able to do that, he's a very interesting and very fascinating dude. And he's written quite a lot. He's been a notable scholar for many decades, and around the 1990s, he developed a new turn about meta-reality. And then in the mid-1990s, he started to come out with books about mysticism and spirituality. Heavy philosophical books, but nevertheless, more esoteric in their nature, and the academic community kind of pushed against that. They really weren't comfortable with that, and some say his theory was, his philosophical writings were not as rigorous, and I don't know if that's simply because he's breaching into a topic that is taboo, or if maybe in his older years he's not as, articulate. That wasn't his shining moment in the philosophical contributions. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't read him. I've read about him, I've listened to his lectures, and his talk was wonderful, although a little bit too much of, I think, graduate level discourse. At any rate, so most of the conversations at the conference were about the intersection of Ken Wilber's theory and Bhaskar's theory and complexity theory, and all of these guys were interacting with each other, and Sean had the opening keynote, and he was using Wilber's theoretical framework to integrate and to put the other two into context. And basically, the gist of this is, to kind of make this all make sense, integral theory has been criticized for a very long time for being too assimilative. Too much, like they always give the metaphor, critics give the metaphor of the Borg. Ken Wilber, will assimilate your theory into his meta-theory of everything. Where, this assimilation process actually degrades the integrity of another theory. Instead of working with another meta-reality, another meta-theoretical framework, it just goes, oh, that belongs in this system, in this part of this system. So it has a very totalitizing atmosphere and energy to it that I think, unfortunately, because of how systematizing it is, and how intellectually pristine and encompassing it is, it can almost be a kind of drug that you get stuck with, and you keep thinking and thinking and assimilating and assimilating. And I don't think individuals meant to do this because of all the checks and balances within the system, where it's so self-aware that it's doing all these things. And, the metaphor of the Borg is a really good metaphor. So the integral theory is really trying to push against this. They're realizing that this sort of thinking is insular. They've been doing this for a while. They've been really doing this since, I give credit to Mark and Sean, because they've been trying to push against this tendency within their community since, at least the beginning of the conferences in 2006, 2007. So, It's not that they haven't been working on this. It's just finally, I think anyway, during this conference, and I haven't been to the others, but I've been exposed to the community. Finally, things are developing and coming to a good fruition, so that now there's a little bit more wiggle room, there's a little bit more space for criticism, there's a little bit less intoxication with this meta theory that explains everything, and a little bit more appreciation for the fact that, you know, no meta theory can encompass reality, and not even the language that, like, Wilbur uses, which is the map is not the territory. That's very often used, like, well, we don't want to assimilate everything. The map is not the territory. We know that, but there are other ways of understanding the territory. So multiple maps are needed, radically different ones. Wilbur's tends to be very systematic, and as Sean mentioned, it tends to be very individualized because Wilbur's background is in psychology, transpersonal psychology. So it tends to be a little bit individualist based. It argues to be neutral and just describing different aspects of reality, like the inner reality, outer reality. But even framing those things in that way is setting up a structure, a bias. So what I really appreciated about this is that we had three radically different theories. Integral theory, Bhaskara's work, which is similar in some ways, but it's very different in its careful attention to philosophical argument in academia, between in the humanities, in the philosophies of science, about you know, inner and outer, and it really explores that inner-outer relationship, and tries to articulate different ways of understanding it. And Edgar Morin, who has a very unsystematic style of thinking, which nevertheless generates a kind of, whoa, like, I understand, or I'm able to see the complex interrelationships between things, between the inner and the outer world, between systems and biology and life, and you know, his famous book is called Homeland Earth. So I really appreciated Morin more so than the Bhaskar and Sean, only in the sense that Morin was able to sort of really creatively embody like a big picture thinker without needing to systematize it or create singular frameworks about it. And actually during the conference, during one of the panelists, one of the presentations, by Alfonso Montori, who teaches at CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies. Alan Combs was there. Alan Combs is another big writer in the consciousness studies area, integral studies. And his thought was that, you know, this whole idea about complexity isn't a theory. It's a way of looking at reality. It's a way of perceiving existence. And what I brought up during that presentation, what I contributed at the end of the lecture, was that I felt we're bumping up against a complex, interrelated world in the same way that you know, modernity during its rise out of the medieval ages, even out of the you know, the European Dark Ages, where we began to pay attention to the material world and started painting things realistically, and painting landscapes, which is a sort of heretical or taboo idea. These things were major breakthroughs in our understanding of the world, understanding of self and reality. And as the integral theorist John Gebser says, this was sort of a break into what he called perspectival thinking. You know, perspectival is, if you have a three-dimensional map, you know, you're at one point in the map, and there's relationships between your point and the other points in the map. So there is an emphasis on material reality, material space, rather than the kind of mythical, imaginal thinking in which you read reality, interpreted it according to icons and signs and symbols of your holy text or of your kind of tradition. So there's an emphasis in kind of growing down into material reality, an emphasis on individuating the self and existing in a material world of perspectival space. Now we're moving into this kind of hyper-perspectival world where things are interrelated and complex, and time is interdimensional, and there's multiple temporicities going on at once. I mean, if you look at quantum physics, for instance, or I don't want to really get into new agey stuff, and I'm not familiar with quantum physics because I feel like it's been hijacked a lot by this sort of new age crowd. But if you look at even at Einstein's relativity, the kind of relativistic universe that we're getting back from the Hubble Space Telescope and other telescopes is mind-boggling and dazzling. The different times and the different spaces, and the further back you look, the further ahead you look into space, the further back in time you go. And light speed and all these complexities. So we're in this hyper-complex world. Because of that, I think, we're awakening to these interrelationships, these interdependent relationships of time and space. And that's part of what this is about, but it's more than that. I think it's also a kind of switch out of the kind of hyper-rationalized modes of thought into more imaginal, associative, and network styles of thinking, and creative styles of thinking, and I think that's very indicative of the internet and so on. But I could go on and on and on about this. At any rate, so the point is that the conference concluded, and it began as well, with the idea that complexity and meta-realities and big-picture thinking are systems of thought that can help us in a time of crisis, in a time where we need to think complexly, where we need to understand interrelationships between self and world and culture and ecology. And by understanding that breadth of relationship, we can thereby respond to the world better, with better styles of thinking, with better, more holistic and systemic responses. And this can be applied to many different fields. So it's kind of, because of the problems of global complexity and the crisis of our, current financial meltdown and late capitalism and Occupy, the ecological crisis and all of these things that, so many people are worried about, can be responded to by a mode of thinking that is equally complex and equally understanding as far as that is concerned, in the same way that we've done in the past. We've broken out of a style of thinking, we've broken out of a mode of consciousness, whether it's sociological or if you argue that it's esoteric. I think that that can be argued. Either way, we're breaking out of a certain mode of thinking that is too compartmentalizing, not holistic enough, and not complex enough to deal with reality. And we're encountering reality in a new way. And that reality is bigger than any one meta-theory and any one singular metaphysical or conceptual framework. And the more that we're aware of that, the better we are. The more that we're aware that there are multiple articulations of a new worldview, specifically and particularly and most importantly a planetary one, then we're better off. So that was sort of the gist of the conference. There's a lot of internal work. There's a lot of shadow work, so to speak, with the community and the kind of simplistic thinking that has been sort of problematic in the past, with thinking too linearly in terms of development, which is not living up to complexity. And the sort of one of them was called integral narcissism, and that's sort of the idea that that this whole assimilating thing or the growth to goodness fallacy, where all of these theories, since some of them are developmental, especially Wilber's work is developmental. A lot of pitfalls have happened because of that. All of a sudden we have these arguments where it's almost implied that the earlier stages of human history were just that, stages of development, and cognitively in some way we are they are inferior to us in many ways, or developmentally inferior in the way a child and an adult and that sort of thing. So there was a call for more rigor. There was a call for more representation and more voices. There's an international integral community that's not being accessed in Asia and Europe, in African American communities and ethnic communities. How is integral addressing them? How is this not just a first world, suburban, Western theoretical framework? How is this addressing global and planetary problems as it purports to do? So there was a lot of sharp criticism of that, and I really appreciated it. Anyway, I gotta go for now, but it's been about 20 minutes, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll probably try to swing on a couple of times a week and post some stuff that I'm working on and that I'd like to have a conversation with everyone about. So thanks for listening, guys.